Boruto and Trunks are some of my favorite archetype of characters in manga. I love the concepts of characters who are basically quote-unquote the last hope for humanity. There's a sense of urgency and high stakes that you don't see every day. And you know what makes it even better? They're only teenagers. Yet, they've been tasked with responsibility that grown men with years of training and experience would fold under. And why is their character design always cold? Is it the sword? Or is it the clothes? All of that mixed with a no-nonsense, nonchalant attitude just adds to the overall tone of their character. You can tell just by their demeanor they have seen horrific things throughout their life. And that's why they act like that. They still have a tendency to bring out the old side of them, the more happy and caring side, but when it's time to get serious against villains, they're locked in, because they understand how heavy the responsibility they bear. I covered Boruto Tubu Vortex on this channel for actually a couple of years now. And me, along with my subscribers, know that Boruto is conveniently more like Dragon Ball than Naruto. Even Ikimoto takes heavy inspiration from Dragon Ball, especially the fight scenes. The fight that feels most like Dragon Ball is of course Boruto vs Jiraiya. Two characters fighting in midair, explosions, fast-paced action. It's just the epitome of Dragon Ball fighting. But that's not the reason for today's video. I want to shine some light on my favorite characters from both of these series, Trunks and Boruto, who I classify as the warriors of time. Or is the boys who lost everything a little better? Nah, I think I'll stick with the first one. But they're so alike. Both of the nicknames would accurately describe their characters. Boruto Uzumaki was a boy who grew up with everything his father didn't have. A mother, a father, a sibling, real genuine friends, and he was a prodigy with endless talent, even going as far as mastering 3 chakra natures even before he graduated from the academy in wind, lightning, and water. Then in a day's time, he was cursed with a fate that was simply unavoidable, and he had to be reminded of that fate every day because of it manifesting in the form of the Karma Seal. From that day, he's been cursed to lose everything, ending up just like how his father started out. So Boruto was always going to be special, not only because of his name and who his father was, but because of what he was becoming. He was slowly losing his identity, he was losing everything even before omnipotence struck the world. Boruto and Trunks started out their lives relatively different, and they both lost everything completely different as well, which does set them apart, but at the same time, binds them ever more closer. And I love that about these characters. As similar as they are, they have their own originality to them that makes their story even better. In this timeline, Trunks grew up without a father because by the time he was born, he was already killed by the androids. Actually, most of the Z fighters were already dead by the time Trunks was born in the original timeline. The only one he had to train him was Gohan, the lone survivor. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that unlike Boruto, Trunks was born with a chip on his shoulder. From day one, he had a responsibility. He had no choice but to fight. But still, even growing up without a father and all his comrades dead with no hope in returning, I wouldn't say he lost everything from day one. Because as someone who never had anything to lose, you kind of learn to enjoy the things you have in life and treat that as your everything. You see what I'm saying? So for example, for Boruto, losing everything might be losing his life. Figuratively, not literally. Losing his home and his friends. But for Trunks, losing everything would simply be losing one person, Gohan, his master, and the only person who he could call a friend. So everybody has a different perspective on what everything is to them. And as a matter of fact, when we look at Boruto, he directly stated to Momoshiki that him losing everything was never losing his life. Boruto's everything could be very similar to Trunks, in the aspect of their calling to action because of the loss of someone very important to them. So when talking about both of these characters, saying they lost everything is simply a way of saying they have lost something which is thought to be of great value to them, not literally losing everything. Despite Trunks losing Gohan, he still had his mother, even the new comrades he gained later on. In Boruto, he still had Sasuke to look after him for a while. And even when Sasuke wasn't in the picture anymore, he still had the teachings, special moments, and life lessons that he passed on to him. But it's still funny that losing their mentor was the one thing that instilled this unbreakable resolve into them. It's almost like they needed it to happen for them to be really capable of taking on this big responsibility of saving the future. Both these series meddle with the concept of time, and they both have a great depiction of what that results in, but in their own unique way. In Boruto, there's no such thing as time travel. However, there is such a thing as time manipulation. With Kashin Koji's Shinjutsu called Prescience, he can literally see multiple futures and different outcomes from those timelines. These visions gives him the necessary information in order to make the changes needed to avoid certain futures, whereas Dragon Ball allows time travel through different time periods with a time machine. This allowed Trunks to go back in time and try to avoid certain futures by manipulating the timeline based on the information he has on the bad future. So Boruto is manipulating certain events to influence the future to a favorable timeline, whereas Trunks is creating timelines out of nothing by going back to the past and giving the Z Fighters information and supply that would be impossible for them to acquire had he not interfered with time, warning the Z Fighters about the androids, giving Goku the medicine for his heart virus. Trunks is creating something that did not exist prior to his arrival. Boruto is taking something that already exists and just striving for it. Remember, in Dragon Ball, Trunks' future was already cemented. He had to go back and live in that future, otherwise it would greatly mess with the flow of time. Boruto has a chance to change his own future based on information from the future, a future that's not yet cemented from this current Boruto. One thing that I love about their character is that immediately after they make their first move to attempt to change the future, they've already strayed from their original timeline, even though Trunks' original timeline is way more confusing than Boruto's, because Trunks' original timeline is directly affecting the future that he's trying to save. And there's like 5 different timelines that was born from Trunks just going back into the past. But let's just talk about the original timeline that they both avoided, the timeline where each of these characters meet their end. So obviously, Koji has stated multiple times to Boruto that he was supposed to be killed by Jiret in the original timeline. This future wasn't nearly as in-depth as Trunks' original timeline, but we still have information on it so we can deduce what happened in this future based on statements said recently in the story. So first off, just like Trunks, Boruto was weaker in his original timeline. In this future, he has all the moves and techniques he currently has, but he didn't have nearly the amount of help he has now in Kashin Koji, who helped him learn these techniques faster because of prescience. And of course, when you learn techniques earlier in your life, you simply have more time to hone those abilities, creating more variants of these abilities, like how Naruto was able to apply a change in chakra nature to his Rasengan to eventually create the Rasen Shuriken, which was the most powerful version of the Rasengan up to that point. So the Boruto now and the Boruto in the original timeline was set up a lot differently because of the help they did or did not receive. And Boruto's help, or the lack thereof, didn't properly prepare him for the challenges that were to come, thus making this version of Boruto much weaker than the one we all know. And like I said, the original timeline of Boruto wasn't in depth like how the one in Dragon Ball was, but I fully expect Ikimoto to eventually explain that more when the time comes, because it had to be a clear reason why Boruto was much weaker in the original timeline. Was Kashin Koji not present in that timeline to help Boruto? Did he not have Sasuke in that timeline? And most importantly, when and how did the timeline shift from the original timeline to the one we're currently on? Once we know this information, we'll know what really went wrong. Now, Trunks' original timeline is much more detailed and extensive, and we clearly know why he's not as strong as the Trunks we know and love. So technically, the original Trunks is the one that never went to the past. Once he went to the past, the timeline started to branch off into multiple futures. So just to stay as consistent as possible, I'll only talk about the one that never went to the past and eventually was killed by Imperfect Cell. So yeah, in this timeline, everything goes as usual. The Z Fighters were killed by the androids, leaving the only fighters left to be Gohan and Trunks. Trunks grows up in a post-apocalyptic world and never gains the knowledge or power from meeting Goku in the past. So you can see, although he still does become a Super Saiyan because of Gohan's death, and still ends up defeating the androids, we know he still is much weaker than he would be if he did go to the past, which is of course in a different timeline. So both Trunks and Boruto benefited greatly because of fate branching off into these different timelines and futures. Trunks going into the past was the best thing that ever happened to him. Just being around guys like Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo, and even Gohan, it pushed him to become even stronger because he's seen the progression, being able to train with his father in the hyperbolic time chamber, getting a chance to surpass his limits and unlock a new form of Super Saiyan. And it even set him up for success back in the future as well, because after the events of the Cell Saga, Trunks was met with Supreme Kai and Kibito as they warned him about the emergence of Majin Buu. So he worked together with them to stop it before he was able to hatch. And in this fight, Trunks went up against Deborah and Babidi and was able to defeat them thanks to him awakening his Super Saiyan True transformation, preventing Majin Buu. And yes, it is canon to the story. So Trunks was able to gain strength not just in the past. He gained knowledge and experience that helped him grow even more in his own time. So as you can see, without that, he was much weaker, which eventually caused him to fall even to Cell in his imperfect form. So Trunks by himself, and of course with Bulma's efforts too by making the time machine, was able to change his fate and the fate of the planet by going back to the past to warn them of the androids. With him doing just that, he already changed the future for the better, because that news already got them on edge. It caused them to train endlessly to better prepare for the androids. Boruto more or less is doing the same, but in this case, he's not going to the past to change the future. He's trying to change the future in the current time, because unlike Trunks, Boruto already has knowledge on future events and timelines, because he has access to a power that allows him to do that. So it's really the same. The way they both go about changing the future is based on information from the future. The only thing that's different is how they do it. Trunks went to the past to change the future, but Boruto is working on the current time to change the future. And also the way they got stronger is quite different too, but it all originates from the concept of time travel or knowledge of the future. So from telling Kawaki about his power to making deals with the devil, Boruto has made all these decisions to ensure the timeline is heading towards the best possible future. Everything he does, every move he makes is in the future's best interest. But also, I have to acknowledge that without others, neither of these characters could do much. They both needed help to save the future and grow stronger physically and mentally. Boruto needed guys like Kawaki, Sarada, Sasuke, and Kashin Koji to make a real impact. And Trunks needed Goku, Vegeta, and especially Gohan to make a real impact. And they both had masters to instill that tenacity and internal strength to be able to handle the burden of being what they are. Gohan was needed for Trunks to become the Warrior of Hope, and Sasuke was needed for Boruto to become the last Shinobi, or the Star of Hope. So this is why I enjoy these two characters the way I do. They both had to overcome some really tough obstacles, and also embrace a fate that was burdened onto them at a young age. But regardless of the odds, or how hard it may have been physically or emotionally, they still rose up and accomplished what may have been impossible for others to do. And most importantly, they did it with aura. So let me know who's your favorite warrior of time, Boruto or Trunks? And who do you think had a tougher journey to save the future? I wanted to keep this one strictly DBZ, so I really didn't go into Dragon Ball Super for Trunks, because that would bring up a whole new discussion. I only needed to focus on Trunks' main story, so I did. And also, that's personally my favorite version of Trunks. So it really fits into the narrative of this being a more personal video. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. And if you enjoyed, be sure to go ahead and drop a like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the post notifications so you don't miss another video like this, or when I go live for chapter spoilers. And until my next one, I'll see you boys and girls later, and I'm out. Peace.